What happens when 120 families move into their dream homes only to discover the land beneath them was never for sale? In Texas, one HOA president's arrogance built an entire neighborhood on lies, and one man's quiet patience turned that lie into a ticking time bomb. Meet Janice Manda, woman who never settled for small wins. She craved power, recognition, and a legacy that would put her name on the map in Briar Glenn, a quiet suburb just outside Dallas. So when the opportunity came to push through a massive housing project, Janice jumped at it. 120 sleek, modern homes, granite countertops, polished wood floors, energy-efficient windows, all rising on what she proudly called the community's forgotten land. To Janice, this wasn't just a development. It was her ticket to prestige, and maybe even a stepping stone into politics. But there was a fatal flaw. That land she called community property. It wasn't community property at all. And that mistake would soon explode into one of the biggest scandals the town had ever seen. Janice was already infamous in Briar Glenn, sharp-tongued, domineering, and always armed with HOA bylaws she quoted like scripture. "We're not just managing lawns and fences," she once snapped during a heated meeting. "We're protecting property values, lifestyles, and legacies." For her, that sun-baked stretch of Texas soil scattered with mesquite trees was wasted space. Developers from Fort Worth knew it too. They wined and dined her, whispering promises of profit and political influence, until Janice finally signed the deal. The board was divided, but Janice's voice outweighed them all. And within days, bulldozers roared to life. Dust clouds rose into the summer sky as signs appeared along Highway 287. The gables at Briar Glen, affordable luxury starting in the low $300s. Young couples, retirees, and first-time buyers saw the dream of stability, order, and brand-new homes. And Janice, she strutted through the construction site, daily tailored blazer, designer sunglasses, shaking hands like she was already mayor. "This is what progress looks like," she boasted to a crowd of buyers. One teacher asked nervously, "Are you sure the land is cleared? I've heard it might be privately owned." Janice laughed, sharp and dismissive. "Rumors are cheap. Paperwork is what matters, and trust me, we've got it handled." But not far away, leaning against his old Chevy truck, a man named Calvin Redden silently watched the bulldozers tear through the land. Calvin didn't wear suits, just faded jeans, worn boots, and the calm face of a man who knew the truth. Because that land, every single inch, belonged to his family. His grandfather had bought it back in 1953, in an era when black landowners were often cheated out of property. But the Reddens held on tight, passing the deed down like a sacred trust. Calvin kept the original papers locked in a fireproof safe. So when he saw the destruction, he didn't protest, he didn't scream, and he didn't call the news. Instead, he waited, because Calvin knew the law. And with every nail hammered, with every family that signed a mortgage, the trap for Janice was only tightening. The mood was electric. Money was flowing, contracts were closing, and eager buyers lined up to put down deposits. Janice strutted out of meetings like a conqueror, convinced she had pulled off the biggest victory of her career. But while she celebrated, Calvin was quietly documenting everything: dates, permits, photos of bulldozers and foundations. J's piece of evidence stacking neatly in his favor. With every home that rose, the higher Janice climbed, and the harder her empire would fall when the truth came crashing down. Calvin Redden wasn't the type to stand out in a crowd. He was quiet, steady, the kind of man who waved at you from his old Chevy truck, but never pushed himself into conversations. Folks at the Briar Glenn gas station recognized him, coffee in one hand, gas pump in the other. Reliable, unshaken. The kind of man you forgot about until life reminded you why he mattered. And behind that calm presence was a history forged in resilience. Back in 1953, Calvin's grandfather, Theodore Redden, returned from the Korean War and bought the very soil Janice's bulldozers were now tearing through. For a black family in Texas, keeping land wasn't easy. Property lines could shift overnight, depending on who had influence at City Hall. But Theodore was unmovable. He filed every tax receipt, every survey map, every deed proof that the Redden name was stitched into that earth. His mantra was simple: paper speaks louder than words. When Theodore passed, the deed went to his son, Lawrence. He built a small house on the edge of the acreage but never developed it. Instead, he told young Calvin, "This land is your insurance. No matter what storms life brings, this ground will keep you standing." Those words etched themselves deep into Calvin's soul. So by the time bulldozers appeared in 2021, he wasn't worried. The deed, carefully sealed in plastic sleeves inside a fireproof safe, gave him more power than any boardroom full of investors. One hot afternoon, as construction crews hammered stakes into the ground, Calvin's cousin Jerome pulled onto the dirt shoulder. He shook his head, staring at the machines chewing into the earth. "You gonna let them keep going like this?" Jerome asked. Calvin leaned casually on his truck. "They're not building on sand," he said. "They're building on my deed. Every dollar they spend just makes my case stronger." Jerome frowned. "Man, they're putting up houses like it's nothing. Don't you feel like stopping it?" Now Calvin took a slow sip of water, unbothered. "Why would I let them dig their own grave? When the time comes, I'll show the judge the papers." Simple as that. That patience set Calvin apart. Most people would have stormed into court or called the sheriff. But Calvin understood leverage. The more they built, the more families moved in. The more money changed hands, the harder the fall would be. He wasn't after revenge. He was after respect. His grandfather's sacrifice, his father's words, his family's legacy, none of it was going to be erased by an HOA president chasing clout. Meanwhile, Janice was still basking in her illusion of power. In HOA newsletters, she plastered photos of herself in a hard hat, grinning beside developers under the headline, "Briar Glenn, Building for Tomorrow." Local papers praised her, quoting her bold claim, "This project will redefine suburban living in North Texas." Calvin clipped every article. Not because he was sentimental, because he understood evidence. At home, his wife Denise began to worry Cal. What if they asterisk Denise's worry grew as the houses multiplied? What if they sell them all before anyone realizes the land isn't theirs? She asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun dip behind half-built roofs. Calvin's voice was steady. "They will sell them. And every single buyer will be part of my case. The HOA thinks they own the ground. The buyers think they bought security, but the deed says otherwise." He turned toward her, eyes firm. "This isn't just about land. It's about proving our name means something." Denise squeezed his hand softly. "Your granddad would be proud." Calvin allowed a faint smile. "He'll be proud when I win." By autumn, the transformation was breathtaking. What had once been empty fields of dust and mesquite trees now stood lined with rows of identical houses. Families toured model homes. Children darted across unfinished sidewalks. And realtors pitched the neighborhood as the next great investment. Janice fed the dream with confidence. During an open house, she assured one couple, "This land has been thoroughly vetted by the HOA. We've left no stone unturned." But Calvin had the stone. And it was heavy enough to crush everything she had built. The gables at Briar Glenn wasn't just rising, it was exploding into existence. Trucks rumbled down narrow roads, hauling steel and concrete. Workers swarmed like ants in hard hats, transforming the landscape faster than anyone thought possible. To longtime residents, it was both awe and annoyance. Some cheered. Finally, our property values are going to skyrocket. One woman, Patricia Karn, said at a coffee shop. Others grumbled about the traffic, the dust, and Janice's arrogance. But Janice didn't care. She was out there, almost, daily heels sinking into dirt lots, pointing out details, posing for photos, smiling for investors. She looked less like a homeowners association president and more like a politician on a campaign trail, and investors loved it. Buyers lined. UP realtors praised her visionary leadership. At one site visit, she ran her manicured hand along the frame of a nearly finished model home. "This is the crown jewel," she declared. "When families walk through here, they'll know Briar Glenn isn't just a place to live, it's a statement." The foreman nodded, eyes on his clipboard. "We're ahead of schedule. Open houses in 2 weeks." "Perfect," Janice smiled, posing for the photographer she had hired to document her leadership in action. And while Janice built her public image, families built dreams. Young couples from Fort Worth walked lots, imagining backyard barbecues and Christmas lights on porches. Retirees drove down from Oklahoma, eager for warm community living. A single mother, Dana Ortiz, a nurse from Arlington, walked her 2 boys through the bare frame of the house she had already put a deposit on. "This is your room," she said with a hopeful smile. Her son's eyes lit up as they ran across the plywood floors. On the surface, everything looked perfect. But perfection doesn't last when the foundation is cracked. That crack began to show at an HOA meeting in the Briar Glenn Community Center. Greg Simmons, a longtime resident, stood up, arms folded tight. "Janice, who exactly owns the land those homes are sitting on? I've heard different things. Some say it's private, some say it's community-owned. Which is it?" Janice gave him a thin smile, her irritation flashing just beneath the surface. "Greg, we've already addressed this." The land was reviewed, cleared, and secured for development. "There's nothing to worry about." But Greg didn't back down. "Then why hasn't the county updated their property maps yet?" "I checked the records last week, and that parcel is still listed under a private owner." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Janice gripped a microphone tighter. "Mr. Simmons, I suggest you leave legal matters to people qualified to handle them. You want progress? Then trust the leadership making it happen." And with that, she slammed the meeting shut before anyone else could speak. For most residents, her confidence was enough. But for a few like Greg, the seed of doubt had been planted. Meanwhile, Calvin continued his quiet watch. Some evenings, he parked his truck a block away and snapped photos of the rising homes. Workers barely noticed him. He was just another passerby. But to Calvin, each picture was another piece of evidence. One afternoon, he overheard a realtor pitching a young couple. "You'll love the security of this HOA. Strong leadership, clean paperwork, nothing to worry about." Calvin's lips pressed into a thin line. Later that night, he slid the photo of that realtor across the kitchen table to Denise. There, selling a dream built on a lie, Denise sighed. "And the buyers have no clue." Calvin nodded. "They'll find out when the time's right." Back at the site, progress accelerated. Streets were paved. Asterisk stop signs were installed. Decorative stone walls rose with the gables at Briar Glenn etched proudly into them. Families moved in, hanging curtains, setting down welcome mats, and planting flowers. From the outside, it looked like a thriving new neighborhood. But beneath the surface, the question lingered: who really had the right to call that land theirs? While buyers celebrated fresh beginnings, Calvin was quietly building a storm. By the time the first families carried furniture into their homes, he had already filled 2 binders with evidence. Every photograph dated, every permit copied, every overheard conversation logged. To outsiders, it might have seemed obsessive. To Calvin, it was survival. He didn't storm meetings or wave papers in people's faces. That wasn't his way. His grandfather had taught him long ago, the loudest man in the room often lost before the fight began. Quiet was Calvin's weapon, and in that quiet, he was forging a case too heavy for Janice's man to ever lift. On a humid August afternoon, Calvin parked on the edge of the new development. The air smelled of fresh asphalt, and children pedaled bikes through cul-de-sacs, echoing with laughter. Leaning on his truck, he panned a slow video with his phone. His friend Troy Hammond pulled up, restless as always. Troy was everything Calvin wasn't: loud, quick-tempered, and unwilling to bite his tongue. He shook his head as he looked at the rows of houses. Man, this don't sit right. They're building a whole city on your ground like you don't even exist. Calvin slipped his phone into his pocket. They know I exist, he said calmly. Then why ain't you stopping them? You've got the papers, the proof. If it were me, I'd shut this whole thing down tomorrow. Calvin let the silence stretch before answering. If you swat a mosquito, you kill one bug. But if you let it breed, when you spray, you wipe out the whole nest. I'm waiting for the nest. Troy blinked, then gave a low whistle. Colder than I thought, Cal. Calvin's half-smile was steady, not cold, careful. At home, Denise worried more each night. She watched him hunched over the dining table, surrounded by maps, deeds, and folders. Cal, I trust you, she said softly, pouring him coffee. But these people don't play fair. What if they bury this before you even get your day in court? Calvin looked up, his eyes steady. They can't bury paper. My grandfather taught me that. When the law's on your side, you don't need to shout, you just have to show up. Meanwhile, Janice thrived in the spotlight. The local newspaper hailed her as the visionary leader behind Briar Glenn's renewal. She cut ribbons, posed for cameras, and spoke like a politician on the rise. At a Friday evening cocktail reception in Arlington, she raised a glass with investors. We took land nobody wanted and turned it into the jewel of the county. That's leadership. A developer laughed, clinking her glass. And it's making all of us richer. Across town that same night, Calvin sat at his kitchen table with Monica Trallian, his lawyer, a sharp woman with 3 decades of property law under her belt. She flipped through the binders Calvin had compiled, nodding slowly. You've got them in a box, she said, tapping a permit. They didn't clear title. Mistake number 1. They built without verifying ownership. Mistake number 2. And every family who bought a home here, they bought something that legally doesn't exist. Mistake number 3. Calvin leaned back, hands clasped. So, when do we move? Not yet, Monica replied. The more they build, the bigger the damages. When you file, you won't just be asking for recognition. You'll be asking for compensation. Millions, maybe? Calvin nodded once. That was exactly what he wanted, not the money, but the acknowledgement, his family's name, their land. Their legacy, meanwhile, life in the new neighborhood bloomed. Moving trucks clogged the streets on Saturdays. Kids bounced basketballs in driveways. Couples planted flowers, believing they were building forever homes. From his porch, Calvin watched their porch lights flicker on at night. Denise asked him quietly, "Do you ever feel bad for them? They don't know their part." Of this, Calvin's voice was low. They should have known. They trusted the wrong people. And sooner or later, they'll realize what it costs to follow someone like Janice. But while Calvin prepared his case in silence, whispers began to spread. Not everyone in Briar Glenn trusted Janice's story about the land. It started as rumors. Began to spread first in hushed tones at cul-de-sacs, over backyard fences, and in the aisles of the Briar Glenn grocery store. At first, they sounded harmless. A new homeowner mentioned that county records still showed the land under someone else's name. Another pointed out the subdivision didn't appear on the tax rolls. Most brushed it off as paperwork delays, but longtime residents started to wonder if Janice had celebrated too soon. The real confrontation came during a heated HOA meeting in late September. The community center was packed. New families sat shoulder to shoulder with residents who'd been in Briar Glenn for decades. Greg Simmons, the same man who'd challenged Janice before, stood again, this time with a stack of documents. "Went back down to the Tarrant County Courthouse," he said firmly. "And guess what? The deed to that land isn't under this HOA, and it isn't under the developers either. It's under a man named Calvin Redden." The room erupted in whispers. Some exchanged nervous looks. Others turned their eyes on Janice, waiting. She adjusted her glasses, jaw tight. "Greg, I've told you before, this land was vetted by professionals. Whatever old record you dug up doesn't change the fact that families are living there now. This HOA will not entertain conspiracy theories." But Greg wasn't backing down. He slammed the papers on the table. "This isn't a conspiracy. These are county records. If you're so confident, then explain why his name is still on the title." The room fell silent until another resident, Evelyn Shaw, spoke up. "I've lived here 15 years. My yard backs right up to that land. And when they started building, I thought it was strange. There were no ownership notices on the fence." "Don't developers usually post those?" Janice's face flushed. "These are clerical oversights. Nothing more. Do you really think a multi-million-dollar project would move forward without proper legal work? Please." But her confidence didn't hit the way it used to. Doubt spread like wildfire. Outside the meeting, whispers grew louder. A lawyer had apparently confirmed that if the land truly belonged to someone else, every single house deed could be void. Families worried about mortgages. What if their homes weren't legally theirs at all? Through it all, Calvin stayed quiet. He didn't attend the meeting. He didn't challenge Janice publicly. But the next day, his friend Troy stopped by. "They're starting to crack. Cal, Greg called you out by name. People are asking questions now." Calvin folded his newspaper. "Good. Let Janice talk herself into a corner. The more she denies it, the worse it'll be when the truth comes out." Troy laughed. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" Calvin shook his head. "Enjoying it? No. This isn't personal. It's business, and business doesn't care about feelings." Meanwhile, Janice was unraveling. Emails from nervous homeowners piled up. Investors wanted answers. Even her developers were pressing for proof of a title transfer. One evening, her vice president Harold finally voiced what everyone was thinking. "Janice, what if they're right? What if this Redden guy really does own the land?" Janice slammed her pen down. "Don't you dare say that to me. We've come too far. If we start doubting now, this entire project collapses. Do you want to be the one responsible for that?" Harold froze. "No, of course not." The board wasn't convinced. Questions were piling up, fear spreading like wildfire. "Just tell them what I tell you," Janice snapped. "Everything's fine, just paperwork. Nothing more." But deep down, even she didn't believe it. She knew the risk of Calvin's claim, how real, how dangerous it was. For the first time, the confidence she flaunted in front of cameras felt paper-thin. Meanwhile, Calvin was ready to strike. At attorney Monica Trallian's Fort Worth office, documents covered her mahogany desk. She tapped a pen against the deed. "They're cornered," she said firmly. "The longer they wait, the worse this gets. We'll give them just enough rope, then we file." Calvin leaned in. "So we let them keep digging." "Exactly," Monica nodded. "The deeper the hole, the harder they'll fall." Days later, the first real blow landed. A plain white envelope appeared on Janice Mann's desk. But the moment she opened it, her stomach dropped. Inside was a formal notice of claim from Calvin Redden, citing deeds, tax records, surveys, even court filings spanning decades. At the bottom, Monica's signature. The letter gave the HOA and developers 30 days to respond or face immediate litigation. Janice shoved it aside like poison. No, this is nonsense. This can't hold up. But the panic in her eyes betrayed her words. By that afternoon, she'd called an emergency meeting. Around the oak table in the Briar Glenn clubhouse, board members and developers leaned in as Janice slapped the letter down. This is extortion, she hissed. Harold Flynn, the vice president, read carefully, his face draining. Janice, this isn't just a letter. If these records are real, then we built everything on the wrong man's land. The developers erupted. Robert Enyol, tall and grim, leaned forward. Do you realize the liability? Buyers could sue. Banks could freeze. Funding, insurance won't cover anything. You told us this land was clean. It was. Janice barked. This guy just wants money. But Harold shook his head. He has the original deed, county registered. That can't be faked. Silence fell. Then Robert slammed his fist on the table. If this is true, we're sitting on a $40 million disaster, and you, he jabbed a finger at Janice, are the one who sold us on it. For the first time, Janice felt her empire cracking beneath her feet. Across town, Calvin was calm. Monica explained the next steps. Once this claim is public, it's like pulling the pin on a grenade. Every homeowner, every bank, every contractor, they'll all know. Calvin's voice was steady. Good. My family's been ignored long. Enough. 2 days later, the news broke. Headlines screamed. Briar Glenn homes built on disputed land ownership in question. Reporters swarmed the subdivision. Cameras caught residents' rage and heartbreak. One homeowner, Dana Ortiz, broke down on her porch. I put everything into this house. My kids thought this was our future. And now you're telling me it might not even be ours. How could they let this happen? The story went viral. Some praised Calvin as a hero. Others branded him a villain. Calvin ignored the noise, leaving Monica to handle the press. At the next HOA meeting, chaos erupted. Homeowners packed the room, shouting over each other. You sold us worthless property. One man roared, Are we supposed to walk away from our homes? Another demanded. Janice pounded the gavel, yelling, Calm down. We are working on this. But Greg Simmons stood, pointing straight at her. You lied. You told us the land was clear. You told us we had nothing to worry about. Now we could lose everything. The room exploded into fury. Outside, Calvin sat quietly in his truck, Denise beside him. They watched the chaos unfold, knowing this was only the beginning. Denise sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap. They're scared, she whispered. They should be, Calvin replied calmly. When you build on lies, fear is the first. Payment due? Denise glanced at him, worry clouding her eyes. They're going to come after you now. Calvin exhaled slowly, watching the glow from the community center lights flicker against the cold night sky. Let them? Been ready for this fight since the day they broke ground. But the letter had only been the opening shot. What followed would transform Briar Glenn from a quiet suburban dream into a battlefield one fought not with weapons, but with lawsuits, betrayals, and shattered trust. By November, the neighborhood no longer looked like a thriving development. It resembled a war zone made of paper and rage. For sale signs lined the streets, yet no one was buying. Realtors stopped showing homes, contractors abandoned unfinished units, and banks froze all financing. The families already living there felt as though their lives were collapsing brick by brick. Inside the community center, HOA meetings dissolved into chaos. Parents dragged crying children along as they screamed at the board. On one bitter evening, Dana Ortiz stood up, her voice breaking. "I've been a nurse for 15 years. I worked double shifts, weekends, holidays, just to give my boys a home. And now you're telling me it might not even be ours, that some stranger could take it away overnight." Her glare locked on Janice. "How could you let this happen?" Clutched the table so tightly her knuckles whitened. "Mrs. Ortiz, no one is taking your home. These claims are exaggerated. The lawyers are sorting it out. Sorting it out." A man shouted from the back. "We're paying mortgages on houses that might not even exist on paper. You lied to us." The room erupted with a chant. "You lied. You lied." Beside her, Harold Flynn leaned close, pale and sweating. "Janice, we can't hold this crowd much longer." Janice slammed the gavel, her voice sharp and shrill. "Enough. I will not let hysteria dictate this community. The HOA is in control, and we will protect your property." But her words rang hollow. The crowd knew it. The anger soon spilled into the streets. One night, furious homeowners cornered a realtor who had sold them their homes. "You said everything was legit." One man yelled, gripping his arm. The realtor pulled free, sweating under the porch light. "That's what we were told. Akum, don't blame. Me blame the HOA." Meanwhile, Calvin stayed quiet, watching from a distance. He never argued with residents or showed up at meetings. Instead, he worked through Monica, the attorney who filed an official lawsuit naming the HOA, the developers, and Janice herself seeking damages in the tens of millions. At home, Denise sat watching news footage of homeowners storming out of meetings. "They're tearing each other apart out there," she said softly. "They should be," Calvin replied, sipping tea without a flicker of doubt. They bet everything on Janice's word. Now they're learning what her word is worth. Denise hesitated. "Tea, but don't you feel sorry for them? They're losing their homes, Cal." Calvin's gaze didn't waver. "My grandfather nearly lost his land to tricks, just like this. No one felt sorry for him. He fought and he won. Now it's my turn. The law doesn't play favorites. Only cares about paper." Back in the subdivision, fear grew heavier with each day. Children no longer played outside. Neighbors stopped speaking. Some blamed Janice, others blamed Calvin, and a few cursed them both. But everyone shared the same fear that everything they had worked for was slipping away. Janice, however, refused to yield. In a private meeting with developers, she paced the room, her heels striking the hardwood floor. "We need to fight. This," she said sharply. "Challenge his deed, discredit his claim. Whatever it takes." But developer Robert Eniel snapped back, throwing up his hands. "Janice, the man has 70 years of clean paperwork. There's nothing to fight. If we go to court, we lose, and when we lose, it'll bankrupt us all." Janice's face hardened. "I won't let that happen. I built this. I won't watch it fall because of some man with a piece of paper." Robert's voice dropped, low and furious. "You didn't build this. You gambled with other people's money and other people's lives. Now the bill has come due." Janice turned away, blinking fast to hide the sting in her eyes.